as we look at the book of John. And we're going to be looking at John chapter 5, verses 25 through 30. Verses 25 through 30 this morning. And so let's go ahead and read this. It says, I assure you, an hour is coming, and now is here, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For just as the Father has life in himself, so also he has granted to the Son to have life in himself. Uh, and he has granted him the right to pass judgment, because he is the Son of Man. Do not be amazed at all who are in the graves will hear his voice and come out. Those who have done good things to resurrection of life, but those who have done wicked things to the resurrection of judgment. I can do nothing on my own. I judge only as I hear, and my judgment is righteous, because I do not seek my own will, but the will of him who sent me. What a great passage. And you know what? Once again, this is why I really I really love the book of John, and be able to go through that, because there's some great what we know as basics for our lives here, but but there's also depth, and we oftentimes just kind of pass the book of John as a surface book, but it's really not. So let's get started. It says the dead will hear his voice and live, in verse 20, chapter 5, verses 25 through 30. Uh, this is actually very exciting stuff. If you look at verse 1, a time is coming, and talking about a future event that will take place sometime in the future. But he also says, and now is, okay, now is. And so uh, that brings it right to the present time, meaning that this time, in this time, he's referring to right now, here, where we are. So that this sets up the idea that this is to be more than just a one-time thing. It may have more than occurrence of just the same event. It may be more than one occurrence. The event that takes place is the dead will hear, and the dead will live, which is answered in verse 24, that when we hear and believe the one who sent him, we pass from death to life. Okay, so uh, there it is. I mean, that is a place that we really can't argue with. This is what he's saying. So the event has to do with the dead hearing. The word "hear" in the Greek has actually five different nuances, literally hearing: legal hearing, learning hearing, obedient hearing, and understanding hearing. Okay, you got to look at this, because realistically, we can hear a lot of things, but we may not understand them. Or, we don't have an ear for legal things, and we can hear it, but not understand it. If you look at Matthew chapter 17, verse 5, in this case, we find Peter, James, and John at the Mount of Transfiguration, and they hear Yahweh, they hear God. This is my beloved Son. I take delight in him. Listen to what he says. In this case, it is the obedient, or Shema, to hear and to do. In Mark chapter 4, verse 33, the word understand is the same Greek word that we are using, that's being used here. So we must go to actually John chapter 5, verse 24, to help us to see how to use the word. The word believes, or believes him who sent me, is important here. It really is. And you know what? Our faith is important in our walk. That's actually the basis, or the foundation of the Christian walk, or the believer's walk, is to believe. The word believes in the Greek, and we've talked about this, is pisteo, and it means to have faith and to put your trust in. But the root word, pestis, and it means to have faith, but it also means to have fidelity. And this word is associated with the Hebrew word shema, to hear and obey. Now, the word fidelity is a little different because we most often hear the word fidelity um, joined with marriage, that somebody has fidelity to their wife or to their husband. And it actually means that connectedness, that the idea that you wouldn't hurt anyone, or you wouldn't hurt that person, or you wouldn't do anything to harm that person. In fact, what you'd want to do is to stay with that person and lift that person up. So the idea of the dead hearing means that the dead hear and obey the voice of Yahweh, the voice of God, and the Son of Man, with the idea that in some way there was an understanding of what was said. Okay, in those, it is those in this category that will live. The Greek word here is zoe, the life, but zoe or daso means to live or to be quick, and it is associated with the Hebrew word kaya, and remember his Hebrew word. The Greek word for life, or zoe, can closely relate to word pasche, which means breath, soul, and is distinct from the body. Okay, so it goes right to the very being of who we are. We find this in Matthew chapter 5, verse 25, or excuse me, Matthew chapter 6, verse 25. The word life here is put soke, and meaning it is not your life or soul more important, that is not your life or soul more important than food. And so Yeshua has life, Jesus has life, and the Spirit that is life and gives life to others as he judges. Okay, but look at John chapter 5, verses 28 through 29. These two verses speak to those that are in the grave and hear his voice. Okay, this is interesting. The word grave in the Greek means remembrance, or grave, sepulcher, tomb, and it's tied to a Hebrew word that means scepter, or excuse me, not sepulcher, a place, a tomb, or a grave. Okay, so he's talking about a literal place of burial, if you will. So these verses, they speak to those who are physically dead and have already been buried or put in a tomb. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 18 through 22, if you look at that verse 18, he was put to death in the fleshly realm. And in verse 19, in that state, being dead in the fleshly realm, he made a proclamation to the spirits in prison in the days of Noah. Okay, and that is in Scripture. Okay, so we see that there's existence after we've been put in the grave, after we're dead. This shows everyone hears the gospel, or the good news, even those who have been in the grave, and it shows that Yeshua, Jesus, is speaking to those in the grave during the time that he had been cut off from the living himself, and goes back to John chapter 5, verses 28 through 29, if you will. Look at Deuteronomy 18:20 through 22. But Yeshua says about those in the graves needs to happen to affirm him as a prophet. And look at Matthew chapter 27, verses 50 to 53. After his resurrection, many of the saints had fallen asleep, were raised, and came out of the tombs. This was during his death. Okay, they came out of the grave and began to appear to many in town. So what is this really about? Is this just about to those? Is this just about those who are saved being resurrected, or is there more to what he is trying to do? If you look at Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 1 through 14, it says that the hand of Yahweh, the hand of God, was on Ezekiel, or the Spirit was on him, and the Yahweh, or God, took him by his hand and put him down in a valley. Now, if you look at verse 1, still, this valley was full of bones, okay? It was full of Hebrew bones. And so they say that they were very dry bones, okay? So they'd been there for a while, and there wasn't any even rotting flesh on the bones. They were dry. And many believe this is tied to Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. Ezekiel was a prophet and was written in Babylon, and is during the exile of King Jehoiakim, okay, of Judah. And it would have been Nebuchadnezzar who took them there and killed them in the valley, or the plain of Dura in Babylon. And so the dry bones were those killed, and involved many from Ephraim, and both sticks present at the prophecy, actually. And so it involved his people. And so now remember, they're in a foreign land, which they believe to be defiled. And all of this has been killed, and their bones thrown on the ground in the valley of Dura. And the prophecy is that they will be brought back to Jerusalem. So in Ezekiel 37, 12 through 14, Yahweh, God, is going to open their graves, as it were, and bring them up from there. And he will put his spirit in them, and they will live. And he will take them back to their land and settle them there. And the word for spirit here is ruach, meaning breath. Okay, so they will receive their breath back. In Romans chapter 11, verses 17 through 27, some branches were broken off, but will be grafted back in. All of Israel will be saved. And now back to John chapter 5, verses 26 through 29. The Father has given life on his own, and granted him the right to judge, so that the resurrection, look at this, all will be resurrected, some to life and others to judgment, okay? So not everybody's going to be saved, but they will be raised. This goes back to Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46. The sheep to life, and the goats, remember he separates the sheep and the goats to eternal punishment, based on believing the one who sent him and believing Yeshua. Look, both passages identify those who have done good things and those who have done bad things. So Yeshua is speaking to the regathering of Israel and the taking of Israel back to the land of their inheritance. What an amazing, amazing teaching that we get from all of amazing stuff. And I hope that you're blessed by this, and I hope that you maybe gained some understanding or something that you didn't see before. And so I'm hoping that you were totally blessed by the lesson. Listen, I would ask that you subscribe to this channel, and make sure you ring the little bell there. And also put a like on the video, and send us a comment or two. And if you have any questions, send those too. We would love to get back to you and be able to dialogue with you and kind of work together to find the truth there.